Hello, I'm Jake Hanson, and today I'll be talking about the positive and negative effects of video games on people. So, I started this topic since it's been pretty heavily in the news recently. Multiple people say that video games are the reason for violence, and that mass shootings can be linked all the way just to violence. So, recently, Trump also did call out during the El Paso Walmart shootings that violent video games were the reason for these shootings and mass shootings. So, if you believe what he says, you would see an increase of violence with the increase of violent video game releases. But when you look at the graph I was looking at, there's no evidence that ever proves that with the release of violent video games that crime rates have increased. If anything, crime rates decrease at the times of violent video game releases. Well, this still doesn't prove that people can be influenced by the violence of video games. So, while you see these mass shooters, some of them might be influenced by video games, so you could see that clearly. And based on the recent mass shootings, only a small portion of the shooters actually had links to games. The most relevant news of a mass shooting that was inspired mostly on video games was the Columbine shootings, where the two teenagers said they were influenced games like Doom, which was also in the media a lot for its very violent take. And they're mainly the only case that uses that evidence. But in a Norwegian shooting, the shooter said that he used Modern Warfare to improve his aim and accuracy on killing people. And a test was taken to see that if you played violent video games that included shooters, it checked out to see that would your aim increase. So recently, the kind of article was retracted due to it couldn't be replicated in real life, meaning that they couldn't prove that because you play video games, you're going to be a better shooter in real life. And so on, all the other shooters pretty much never really had a link or played video games at all. And even if the Columbine shooters did play video games, about 77% of kids their age also plays video games, and it's only the small portion that did that. So you can't really hold that against them since almost everyone plays video games. And I think that the main thing is that news media sees this kind of as a bad thing, but they're kind of confusing correlation with causation. What I mean is they correlate and maybe they have some things connecting each other, that video games are violent, but just because video games are violent, they don't cause the person to commit violent crimes. Another thing I also found interesting is that while we have the #1 video game sales of any country, if you combine the next top 10, like including China, Japan, UK, Germany, and all the top 10 added all together and combined has almost half the less gun violence in their country. So meaning, just because video games are relevant in other countries, in our country we just have more gun violence, and it's nothing to do with the game itself. Because if games did cause violence, you would see those other countries having an increase in gun violence. But even with the top 9 combined, they could not even equal us a little over half of the gun violence we have. And while I continue, based on the researches that tried to prove that, only to prove that video games did cause violence, most studies could only find a very weak correlation that if you play violent video games, you're going to be violent. Another thing I found super interesting is that in 2009, when the California wanted to ban the purchase of violent video games, the ruling went all the way up to the Supreme Court. And in the end, the Supreme Court voted 7-2 that video games did not cause violence. They even wrote that psychologically, studies supporting to show a connection between exposures to violent games and harmful effects on children do not prove that such exposures causes minors to act aggressively. Any demonstrated effects are both small and indistinguishable from effects produced by other media. So, also another interesting fact from this is that it was also written by Anthony Scalise, one of the most right-wing conservatives on the Supreme Court. But the even weirder thing is, it was approved by Ruth Bader Ginsburg and Sonia Sotomayor, who were also super left-wing liberals on the Supreme Court. So it was interesting that both these two sides of politics could come to agree that violent video games doesn't cause violence in the users. So I just thought that was interesting that they could even rule, even based on different politics, that they could agree on that. But even though that they prove that violent video games doesn't cause violence, another interesting aspect that kind of is overlooked now is kind of the gambling aspect of video games. For example, in a game called Battlefront 2, they had this mechanic where you could use your own money to buy in-game purchases to improve your weapons, players, guns, and all that. So right here, you could buy packs right in the main lobby. Just buy packs to buy guns and weapons, as stated earlier. And how you do that is you use your own money and buy these currencies all the way up to $40, and you could keep doing that over and over. So that might not look as bad, but based on the gambling aspect, it just, let's say you didn't get the weapon or gun you wanted. Players could keep spending and hoping that they could get it, and they couldn't. And then another example that gambling came very big in video games was in GTA. So recently in GTA 5, they added a casino where they monitor it so you can't spend your full money, but pretty much you can buy in-game currency and play a different amount of poker, spinning the wheels, horse betting, and all that. So right here you can see that I'm playing poker and you bet all the way up to 5,000 chips. That might not seem like a lot, but you can pretty much buy in this game as much currency as you want and then convert it into the currency in this, which you can convert into chips as they use at the casino. So pretty much just stating that it's pretty much just a gambling aspect in the game. So you could just continue doing this in gambling. It's just kind of crazy that games can put gambling aspects just in games these days. Like, that could just lead to gambling problems in the future if it ever even got out of hand. They do monitor this, as I said earlier, by kind of limiting how much money you can put in on casino chips. So that's always a bonus, but it's just games I feel like could in the future abuse that, and that's just a negative effect. Also, a negative effect I found from this is that it could shorten your attention span just by playing video games. So that's also a negative effect. So for like another example is that not only that can you play like poker, but you can play blackjack, roulette, and all that kind of casino stuff. Another game is they have this kind of horse betting where you just automated luck and you can spend up all the way to 10,000 chips in casino currency and just bet away, and chances are you're not going to lose money, but in the future, if games do find a way, they could abuse this very hard. So, as you can see, games do have the negatives in there, but in the end, games don't really cause violence. As I stated that there's a small crime rate, video games aren't really connected to mass shooters, and the Supreme Court even ruled that video games don't cause violence. So, I just like to leave you with that. Thank you for listening, everybody, and I hope you all have a great day, and goodbye.